and others as they join. So welcome to the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative Winter Webinar Series. This is the third of 4 presentations in this series. My name is Jamie Ellis. I work as the Natural Areas Coordinator at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And I am part of the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative advisory team. The Prairie Reconstruction Initiative is a community of prairie practitioners and researchers from more than 30 organizations with support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, working together to improve the practice of prairie reconstruction. Our mission is to build an engaged community of practice who work together to overcome uncertainties through all phases of prairie reconstruction. We envision prairie reconstructions that are biologically diverse, ecologically functional, and resist invasion by non-native plants. We focus our activities on evidence-based tools and peer-to-peer learning. We developed a prairie reconstruction vegetation monitoring protocol and built a prairie reconstruction database, our focus of today. By pooling and analyzing data from many reconstructions, we hope to reveal pivotal elements that will increase the likelihood all reconstructions meet expectations. Our learning opportunities include both in-person and online events where the PRI community can exchange experiences and knowledge with each other. We believe these insights from both individual experiences and scientific investigation lead to our collective success. So today, during the presentation, your cameras and microphones are turned off. Uh, please type questions and comments for the speaker in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And I will enable video and microphones for everybody at the end. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded. We will upload it to our YouTube channel when it's processed and ready to go. And now I'm happy to introduce our speaker. Ian Lane works as the inventory and monitoring data manager in the Midwest Regional Office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Ian earned his undergraduate degree at Michigan State University and earned both a master's degree and a PhD at the University of Minnesota. As the data manager for the inventory and monitoring branch of the National Wildlife Refuge System, he works on projects spanning grassland monitoring, pollinators, water bird management, and more, providing science and data support for biologists across the Midwest Refuge System. Currently, Ian is the manager for the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative database, working with PRI contributors to bring data into the system, and he helps to provide insights on prairie reconstruction outcomes to practitioners through data analysis and summarization tools. And today he is going to tell us about the state of the PRI database. Ian, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jamie. Let me boot up my presentation here real quick. Presuming it all works. All right. Thanks again.
Looks good to me.
Seeing everything okay? Excellent. So thanks everyone for joining me today. My hope is to kind of give us the current status of the PRI database. It's something that the PRI initiative has had as a priority for a long time. And when I began my position 2 years ago, was one of my top priorities for getting going. And so we've had a couple of years to kind of mess with the back end and move forward. And I'm excited to kind of share some of the fruits of that effort today, and hopefully give folks who are not familiar with the database enough information to feel comfortable potentially becoming a collaborator and joining in. And so with that, I'm going to get rolling. So the history of the PRI database is really interesting. And so take my historical information with a grain of salt because I was not there, but this is what I could dig up from our database. But a lot of what PRI is started back in 2012 with an important workshop. And in that workshop, a need for a seed database was identified. This was the first mention I could find of a database. There was probably some idea that we needed something earlier than that, but definitely a seed database. And like, we need to just create a common language for everyone like, about what we're doing to restore prairies and reconstruct them. And so this was back in 2012. So this picture here involves some people in the chat, and I was surprised how long ago 2012 is now. It does not feel that long ago. So some people can feel a little nostalgic there. The next workshop came in 2016, and this possessed some of the first iterations of the PRI database. There was some implementation in Access, Microsoft Access. They were starting to develop some kinds of use in SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint, for people to get involved. And things were just kind of starting to get off the ground by 2016. And even then, there was some language about how do we enhance, how do we improve. Then the 2019 workshop comes along, and there is a lot of evidence in the record about SharePoint being kind of this really challenging access point for anybody who wants to get involved. And so it's clear at this point that a new system is needed, and it needs to transition from its current system into a new format. And so that's kind of where COVID enters the room and really upends a lot of the planning and progress that was going on with this. And well, it didn't stop completely. It did kind of slow down to the point where there was not a lot of movement on it for a while, at least not on the front end. So with that, I kind of started mentioning some of the challenges, COVID being one of the big ones that slowed down the implementation of the database, even though it was kind of being implemented before that. There was some change in positions, people moving to different jobs, people kind of moving in and out. That kind of slowed things down. There's always this getting more acquainted with the system, getting back up and going. The SharePoint aspect was really hard to share with people and get them access to. And as always, digitizing this prairie reconstruction data is incredibly time intensive. Like the picture you can see, that's a real picture. Like I took that from some, there's like notes and all this stuff. And so just getting the data into any kind of database is already pretty challenging. So, the kind of the initial piece of the PRI database, the vision, I should say, is a collaborative space where everyone can come together to provide data, but there's kind of these pieces that are making it difficult to get there. So that's kind of where I enter. So I'm going to give a little bit of a state of the database talk about where we've come since that kind of 2019 workshop. And so you were just seeing this graphic. It's one of the core ways that we communicate the PRI mission. And you can see on there is this chunk for the PRI database. So if we kind of pull out that chunk, you could see that the PRI database is kind of conceptualized as information relating to sites, the planting process, ongoing management, and monitoring. So not a small task. Four very important pieces that we all, or I should say that the PRI group has identified as being critical to understanding how prairie reconstruction outcomes are formed. So with that, there's this really messy database schematic that I actually am not really intending anyone to try to read, and nor should you try, because it's a little out of date, but it's me being a little lazy and it being conveniently there. I'm taking it and adapting it, and I'm going to help try to walk through the structure, because the structure is still there. And I want everyone on the call to kind of understand what kinds of data are involved in the database, how they kind of string together, and how we'll hopefully use them to start to learn about prairie reconstructions from the database. So I'm going to start teasing some of these pieces apart just to give an overview of all the things that we're trying to collect and how we can move forward from there. So the first thing I really want to focus on are these three kind of like strung together boxes at the top. What these are the primary pieces of spatial data that we're trying to collect for prairie reconstructions. And this is one of the core improvements that everyone has kind of talked about in these workshops is, we're trying to move away from Access or move away from SharePoint and move more into this realm of having more advanced geospatial data and kind of taking advantage of some of these tools to better learn about prairie reconstructions. So I'm going to unpackage these a little bit because they're nested within each other. The first one is the site layer. So for all prairie reconstructions that we put into the database, they're associated with some kind of site. So the site is a broad administrative area, and it holds some really basic organizational data as well as like office data as in other administrative pieces, and kind of gives us the context for which some of these prairie reconstructions in this group are organized. So within nested underneath the site, there will be many units. So the units are essentially these project areas or intermediate administrative zones. And there can be many of them within a site. And they hold information primarily on objectives and what the goals for management of that unit are. And so it's not yet kind of containing that like really hard scientific data. The site and the planting units kind of help us get a geospatial framework for how the reconstructions are situated and give us important information about the administrative and objectives of the areas that we're trying to improve. And with that, this final leg or the end of the chain here are the reconstruction areas themselves. So there can be many reconstructions within these planting units. And this is the area that's actually seeded with the prairie reconstruction itself. And it holds a little bit more of this like important information that we could use in analysis or other kinds of summarizations about the timing, the method of seeding, the preparation of the site. So it's really the meat and potatoes of the PRI database. But to get there, we kind of want to build up to the reconstruction areas through the site and planting unique polygons. And so as we've worked to kind of build these polygons within the database with different partners, sometimes it's really obvious what a site and a planting unit are. Other times we kind of have to make it up, and that's okay. They're really just there to help us understand things better. And if we need to do something as simple as say the planting unit and the site are really the same polygon, we can just do things like that. So there's a little, and I'll give an example here in just a moment, but that's kind of the way that the core of the database was conceived as this nested spatial layers. So I'm going to use Detroit Lakes as an example, and hopefully they're okay with that. But Detroit Lakes Wetland Management District is one of the refuges in the National Wildlife Refuge System. And the way that we have them in the database as a site is the entire district area, which includes many counties within Minnesota. And a lot of organizations have these kind of like broad administrative units where it's quite large and they cover a large area. And it's useful to know about these kinds of areas because there's maybe one office that has all the folks who are in charge of all the lands in these areas. And so knowing what the extent of that is and who you might want to contact if you are interested in the work that they're doing is really nice. So kind of zooming in a little bit, it's you start to see that there are lots of planting units within this site. So these planting units are technically waterfowl production areas. So if you're not familiar with wetland management districts, They're full of smaller units called waterfowl production areas. And, they could be equivalent to maybe like a state wildlife management area or other kind of small to intermediate sized tracts that have many parcels across this bigger area. So you can see that they're kind of complex and they're kind of nested within here, but they also kind of include they can also include other types of units as well from other types of sites. But before I get into any of that, the reconstruction layer then happens within one of these units. So you can see here, there's essentially 3 prairie reconstructions nested within one of these planting units. So going from all the way up to the site, which you can see is the green in the background, the planting unit, which is the blue underneath the yellow in the reconstruction area, we kind of get this really integrated spatial picture of how these reconstructions are set up in the landscape. And that can be really great especially the spatial component that we've been looking for folks who are trying to understand how landscapes affect, some of the outcomes in prairie reconstructions. We have a lot to offer there by having a lot of this spatial information. So moving on from that, these core spatial areas then have a lot of the meat and of the data we are after kind of nested within them. So you can kind of see that these branches kind of shoot out from this reconstruction area into these different tables. And I kind of break these tables down into two to three different sections. The one I'm going to talk about next is like this fine scale data on like the sites, the actions, and the seedings, and any plugs that have been planted there. And so I have in red areas of the database that have not been implemented yet. And the philosophy I've been using here is not to let perfect be the enemy of good, because some of these pieces are more complicated and take a little bit more refinement and maybe engagement with partners to get right. We didn't want to stop the whole process from being implemented while we work on these other things. We wanted to be able to have people start getting shape files in, start getting other pieces of information in while we sort of work on these other pieces in the background. So with that being said, the PRI database has planned pieces that are not implemented yet and pieces that are being implemented now. And I'll talk a little bit about the unimplemented pieces, but I won't dwell on them overly. But if you have questions or concerns or other things, we can certainly talk about that. So first of all, seeded species is one of the most core pieces of data that's associated with these reconstruction areas. And the name is pretty self-explanatory. It's the species you seed at the reconstruction. And it can have a lot of different information stored in here. So we have not only the species, but like some measurement of the amount, the lab testing that goes on, the locality of the seeds. And we have these set up kind of in a seed lot sort of system. And we've done a lot of work to try to make sure that we make this process as easy as possible. If you have a big seed lot or a bulk harvest, you enter this data once, and then you can assign it to multiple prairie reconstructions. And it's pretty clear that this is a bottleneck for the database, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that entering seed mix data, especially as they get very complex, 70, 80 species, just selecting those and making sure they conform to the taxonomy that we want to have it can be very time consuming. And we've tried a lot to make this as easy as possible. And I'll get into some of the tools we're using, but the seed mix data is something that we're calling as like one of the core enrollment pieces of prairie reconstruction data that we want for the database. So with that, what I mean by that is, and you'll see later that for a site to be fully entered into the PRI database, it needs seed mix data. Incomplete sites where we don't have seed mixes, we're kind of staging at different places before they're added to the database. But so it's sort of this pinch point where we know a lot about the prairie reconstructions and some of the partners right now, but they're not all in the database because we haven't gotten all the seed mix data entered yet. So moving forward, the plug area in species is kind of this specialized offshoot that is somewhat related to the seed mix, but doesn't have to be. But in this diagram, it is. But there is a polygon layer that could describe an area where you've installed plant plugs. And that plant plug polygon, that's a mouthful, can also be related to a number, like a species table, where you know which species were planted, what other elements of the plug that's important to track, like the size of the pot, things like that are stored. It's not something I've seen a lot of people implement, but we actually have implemented it and do have some areas where plugs have been installed. And that's something that I'm kind of continuing to engage with folks on and looking for feedback about if we're getting all the right things in this part of the database. So definitely folks have opinions about what are the critical pieces of information we need to understand plug plantings. I would love to like talk with you and hear more about what you think are the critical pieces there. Anyway, moving forward, um, it looks like so this top box here, I must have like accidentally, let's go back to a little bit. Yeah, I must have accidentally got rid of that box. But up here at the top is an unimplemented piece that is the site history. So the site history is essentially supposed to be gathering 10 years of sites management and or other important site information to an extent of 10 years before the planting occurred. And this is supposed to provide kind of critical context to how maybe the reconstruction establishes and progresses. And it's something that we do have, it's pretty well developed. And we're probably pretty close to implementing it, but is not one of the core pieces of enrollment that we've kind of been using thus far. So it's something that it's on the horizon for us to implement, but I'm just waiting a little bit longer to see what folks are thinking about before trying to get it going in the database. And moving forward, the last piece that is not implemented, and you can see is not connected directly to these reconstruction area polygons, are the management actions database. And it's probably one of the most important and asked for needed pieces of the database. But essentially, we all kind of probably know that one of the biggest pieces of how reconstructions develop over time is how they're managed. And so being able to track that in the database is very important. It's a little more complicated and getting those pieces together, like all the different kinds of management actions that could be done that we want to track and the kinds of information we need associated with those actions and how much that varies by action. It's a lot to kind of think about at the moment. And so, like what information is needed for a burn and versus a grazing action or a chemical application. Those are all like there's a lot of different database pieces that we need to think through before trying to make something like that live. But it is planned, and we definitely are. I'm definitely thinking about it moving forward. As more folks get seed mixes entered, and we kind of progress to a point where people are looking for the next stage of learning from Prairie, the database. So yeah, that's something on the horizon. The other section of the database that I'm going to focus on here outside of this fine scale data is the monitoring data. So the monitoring protocol developed by PRI, that was, and people will correct me, I'm sure, I believe it was completed near 2016 and in partnership with a number of people, and has come to be an important part of the PRI database. And so there's two protocols, and I won't go into them in detail, but they include the nested plot survey and the meandering walk survey. So do two different kinds of surveys with different objectives that they're best tailored for. And they're both something that we implement through the database and create actually, truthfully, like a lot of applications for people to enter data and to collect data in the field for. So I will speak more about that too coming up. But essentially, there's this meandering line that we have the ability to capture the path of, and then all the associated species found along that path. And so it's not mandatory that somebody collects a path when they do a survey, but some people may want to in order to kind of standardize their surveys. So they're walking the same line or know where they've visited before and may try to target new areas or things along those lines. And yeah, it essentially contains all the information that is outlined in the PRI protocol. Like essentially like the soil moisture components, the abundance category, the distribution category, things like that. And and I think like a species list is a big objective of this protocol. The next one is the nested plot points. So this is set up so that we generate a grid of points for the site to be monitored. And with those points, we can have, thanks Amanda for providing that. With those points, they're associated with a survey at each point. And collectively, they make up one whole survey across the site. And so the nested plot point also provides a lot of spatial data about where data or where surveys occurred within a prairie reconstruction. So some examples of those sites in the database is a meandering walk survey. This was done at Big Stone National Wildlife Refuge. So shout out to Brandon and folks who did that. And these are nested points in a couple reconstructions in Detroit Lakes. And so this is kind of what they look like when they're conducted within these prairie reconstructions, going from point to point to do surveys or doing that walk across the site. And so I wanted to present this. This is research that came out by Dan Larson and others back in 2018. And it was sort of an example of what could be done with the data in the PRI database using both the monitoring protocol and information that could be in the database. And so they looked at two different wildlife refuge, Glacial Ridge and Neil Smith, and looked at a number of different important factors like age of the reconstruction, management activity, burn specifically, and planted richness, so what was in the seed mix. And they looked at the proportion of planted species as a function of some of those and found some interesting patterns. And so as we kind of gather more data, look at more sites, we can do these kinds of analyses and really get into the world of big data across whole landscapes and really try to gain some large insights from this stuff. So with that, we have been leveraging this system called ArcGIS Online to kind of move from SharePoint into like a more collaborative space where we have a lot more control and essentially tools to help people with data entry, data collection, and pieces like that. And it's been really interesting, kind of like seeing what kind of things we can do with it. We can create workspaces for whole groups of people that they can access and have kind of a lot of control over who sees the data that they're entering, and they can send out only just specific pieces if they want. And we have dashboards, the ability to make dashboards within this system that summarize the data and give quick access to people, and really kind of like a one-stop shop for a lot of database needs. But there have been challenges too, so I don't want to make it seem like it's been there is this aspect of AGL where folks need to have accounts and access, and without that they can't access any of the tools. And so institutions tend to have some of this access, like federal, state, nonprofit, university groups can typically easily access this, but it makes it more difficult for private landowners and others to really jump in a simple way. So it's really limited our work to organizations thus far that can do this. We do have pathways and options open to getting individuals involved, but they're kind of like single service. They're not like broad, anybody can walk in the door sort of tools. So that remains a challenge, trying to find ways to get these collaborations working in a broader sense. But just this past week, we've launched finally the PRI database hub site. So it's essentially going to be the primary way that folks who are interested in the database can come check on the status and be able to kind of learn about what's in there, what it's about, a lot of these different pieces. And so I'm going to actually do a live demo here in a second. And that always goes wonderfully, as many people can attest. So I am going to share my screen to my desktop, and I'm going to walk through the hub site a little bit. But I blew this link up, nice and big, so that if anybody wants to, like copy and paste or write it down and visit it on their own, they can. They should be able to see a lot of the content on this hub site. But I will share my screen from there. Great. Jamie, can you see this like we had tested before?
Yes, it's there, Ian. I see it
Wonderful.
fine.
Excellent. So this is the PRI database hub site. And so just to kind of walk through what's here, there's a navigation bar at the top where you can get to the different pages, but this is the home page and has a little bit about the database. And we have kind of like just an overview dashboard. So here you can kind of see what data is staged and it was within the database currently. And I had kind of mentioned earlier that we know about a lot of reconstructions, but not a lot of them are complete with all the seed mix data. And so the sites that are completely done with seed mixes and other associated data, you can see at a glance. We have 243 prairie reconstructions in here, across this area, and that total over 17,000 acres. So that's probably only a fraction of what we know is out there and will eventually be in the database. But it's a good spot that as the database updates, so will this dashboard. Anyone with interest, research or contributing or any other kind can kind of say like, oh, at a glance, where are the reconstructions we know about? And how much activity has been going on. So you can use these bars to kind of start filtering. So you can see that Minnesota DNR, the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have sites in here. So I'll just, since I'm a little biased towards the refuge system, I'll click that. And then this filters out all the different sites that are out there. So just to keep picking on Detroit Lakes, because I think they're wonderful. There's the Detroit Wetland Management District. And you can kind of see zooming in so we can look at that better. And we can start to hone in on some of the planting units. So that intermediate spatial layer that I presented earlier. So we can go and look at Afison Lake and see the couple of prairie reconstructions. There's 2 prairie reconstructions associated with that, totaling almost 65 acres. So this is some of the functionality of this dashboard that's on the front page that anybody should be able to kind of look at. So going down, there's a spot for frequently asked questions that I'll try to update over time. But what is the current status of the database? How do you get involved? What is the data currently available? And you can kind of click these down and look at some of these. But I will try to answer. I hope I somewhat answered what is the current status of the PRI database. But this get involved piece is one that I'm going to talk about here. And so there's 2 ways that I envision more people coming into the database from the current contributors we have now. We need to build some of those site and planting unit polygons. And there's just no really super easy way to do that. And there's going to be folks who want just data access. They might be researchers or other kinds of folks that just want to know more about the data that's in there. And so there's essentially going to be a contributors track, and there's going to be a data group track. And so folks who are interested in one of those 2 tracks will have the option to submit a form. So let's see if this works. Hopefully it does. So if you have an ArcGIS Online account, you can click yes, and it'll fill in some of this important information, like what's your name, what's your ArcGIS account name, so that if we were going to add you, I could do that easily. Your contact email, if you want to add your organization, and you can kind of indicate what access level you're interested in. And just for reference, like a contributor would have the same kind of access as someone who just got content group, but a contributor would need to work with me a little bit on creating their own workspace, getting their own data entry points, and all that kind of good stuff. And just a little way to kind of indicate why they're interested. And so this is a pathway of kind of getting involved that I haven't talked through extensively with folks yet. So I imagine that there will be some limitations. Like it won't just be every single person who wants to see everything can come in, but we'll have a system worked out where we can kind of discriminate. Okay, these people have a legitimate need to want to access the database, and some folks don't. Which might be kind of different than like many of the conservation focused databases out there, where you kind of just sign up through their webpage and get rolling and provide like monarch data or whatever. But since it's just me and we're kind of tapping into these tools through AGOL, and I'm not a web developer, we're kind of approaching it from this angle. And you can see there's a lot of information about paperwork reduction because we're the federal government. So going back, so that's one way you can signal your interest. And then once we have a system better in place, we can kind of go through and say like, yes, you should definitely have access, and let's get you into one of these groups, or let's work together more to create a workstation or working space, and start populating some of these polygon layers. And we really utilize Survey 123 a lot, and I'll show that a little bit. But we have there's a little blurb about the PRI database that the folks in the PRIAT team, the advisory team, have put together, that I think is great. So you can see that here as well as on the primary PRI website, and a shout out to all our partners. And so folks who are interested in learning a little bit more about the database, there's a little bit about all the things that I just presented here. And folks can kind of go through that if they're interested, and just kind of see some of these core pieces that I presented in maybe a little bit more detail here. And then there's this contribute tab. So contributing, as I kind of indicated, if you're a contributor, you're going to need a way of entering data into the database. And the way that I've worked this through the hub site is that we would create for you a working space within AGOL and get anyone who needs access to that. And it would be unique to your organization or group. And so only you and your fellow colleagues would have access to those data information tools. And you could access all of them here, but also Survey 123 has a desktop app that you could access it through. But this is organizationally convenient if you just need to see all your different pieces. So I can see everything because I'm the database manager. But if you were part of the Fish and Wildlife Service, you would only see these data collection apps. So if you were interested in, say, entering a planting event, you could click here, and it's going to take me to Survey 123. They'll ask you some questions, and oh, that's fun. Yay for live demos. But I think I can actually, let's go over to here. So this is the actual desktop app. And so looks like I need to just sign in really quick. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain here. Oh, that's fun. All right, anyway, we'll move on. We won't mess with that for the time being.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine, Ian.
Yeah. Let's go back to the website. But anyways, these forms are essentially the way that you would enter some of this data. And we've set up one for a lot of the different pieces that I talked about: seed mixes, planting events, the monitoring apps, the meandering walk, and the nested plot. And these are sorts of things that, especially for monitoring, you can use in the field. If you can enter directly into these apps while doing the survey. No need to necessarily use a paper data sheet, though you can. You can enter data into the paper data sheet and bring it back to the desktop and enter the data into one of these Survey 123 apps that way. And so if you have an institutional working space, this is where you would kind of go to set that stuff up or to kind of get access to it. And we would set that up with you kind of in collaboration. And so going over to the exploring the data piece, this is where many of the dashboards, the more detailed dashboards that will help kind of make sense of what's in the database will live. And you will need to be a member of the content group to access some of this stuff. But right now I've got two dashboards kind of worked up, and I'll try to show them both. One of them is the monitoring data dashboard for the meandering walk. So let's see if I can launch that from here. I'm gonna have to log in again. Let's see if it's gonna let me accept. Oh, good. It seems like it'll be okay. So yeah, here we have kind of like the landing page for the meandering walk survey. And so kind of similar to that one dashboard showing you, there's some ways of kind of refining down what you want to look at. But let's just go straight to a reconstruction area. And again, we see some of Detroit Lakes reconstructions in here. So I'm going to click on Dresden North, and it's going to take me over there and show me the reconstruction. And it has a species list for all the years surveyed. But if we want to just focus on 2023, we could do that. And gives us a list of all the pieces of information here. And here we have the abundance rank. It's one of the pieces that's collected here. And so the way that this dashboard is set up is that you could potentially look at and see how this abundance rank has changed over time. In this case, between 2022, 2023, maybe things are going up, going down. We could maybe just focus on the native species if that's all we really want to look at. And we could potentially look at maybe just forbs. Maybe we only really care about the native forbs and what those are doing over time. And this just is not like some complex analysis or anything. It's just showing what's exactly in the database and kind of presenting that information easily and quickly. So this is the Meandering Walk Survey dashboard, and I'll go back to the hub site. And I've also put together a dashboard to kind of explore the seed mixes as well. So that's kicking out here. And so here I kind of set it up in a different way with different questions in mind. And I'd love to work on this over time with people to make sure that it's presenting the most useful information to folks. But if I were to look at, let's see here, let's look at a reconstruction. Maybe one of the ones at Glacial Ridge. I'm going to look at a bunch real quick here. Just to really, there we go. This is the one I want to look at. Okay, so in this reconstruction, there's a lot of seed lots involved. So you can get a species list here of all the kind of species that were in these that were totally seeded in this reconstruction area. And you can also get information about the species within each individual seed lot. So as you kind of go down here, you can see that this list changes, and you can really start to get at some of that. I was looking at this and I see that this isn't changing. These two pieces aren't changing, and that looks like something I need to edit really quick. But that's what would happen ideally, is that you could see the number of species within each seed lot and the distribution of those flowering plants across those seasons. And so this is just another example of things that we can do. And it's kind of set up to answer this question about milkweed, like how many species of milkweed, and do you have flowering plants throughout the different parts of the season? But we could set it up to answer different questions or think about things in different ways. And that would be really interested to hear from folks what they might think about that. So with that being said, those are the two dashboards, and I anticipate adding more dashboards in the future as we kind of figure out what people need, what kind of stuff people want, and then also the potential scenario of folks who are looking just for data for analyses or different kinds of studies, working with those folks directly to do a data download or something of that nature is kind of how I envision that working for now, but also potentially being able to download data from the dashboards too. So a lot of potential avenues for how we can present data, how we can get it into partners' hands, and do different things. And we're still thinking through a lot of those pieces, but I'm pretty excited to see where we can go and what kinds of things we can uncover together. So I think with that, I won't belabor this anymore. The survey 123 thing, there's a lot of forums, and we could probably go through those a little bit if it were coming up, but I won't go through that that morass on the back end at the moment. So maybe I'll stop there and see if there's questions or thoughts, or if there's anything we want to revisit from here and see where we're at.
Thank you so very much, Ian. Yes, please go ahead and type your questions in, or I've enabled cameras and mics for everybody left on the meeting. So you're if you would like, you can do that. Um, yeah, you mentioned Diane Larson's retrospective study that she led. And then last week, our speaker Andrew Call talked about a retrospective study that he did, and right, and this is exactly the sorts of things we want to look at. These time for space, time, space for time and time for space studies. That we can ask the questions of not just limited data sets, but even bigger data sets. Hopefully. And then Andrew, I'm not sure I don't think he was able to make it on the line today, but he wanted to ask, are there plans to publish any analyses or syntheses on the outcomes of restorations using the PRI protocol and database?
I might be not the right person to ask about that. I'm
Right,
not,
right,
I
right.
personally am not planning on doing any kinds of analyses
Yeah.
at the moment, though that may change as we've started to define questions. And we sent out a survey to the PRI group, and
Hmm.
anyone who's on the list, to kind of um, reinvigorate what are the questions and that are most pressing to folks who are doing this. And so we still have that list, and that
Hmm.
actually might be another great webinar, is to kind of talk about what those questions were from everyone. But I could see definitely working with people at universities or the USGS or others to help get them the data they need, or to try to track down other pieces of data that they might I'm because I know a lot of the data now, but not all of it is in the PRI database. So if people start asking questions, it might stir the pot enough to move things on certain areas. So I'll leave it at that cryptic response.
Okay.
um,
Thanks, Ian. And yeah, and I and others can chime in who've been part of these discussions. Is that yes, we've had these discussions of using these data and analyzing them and publishing them coming out of the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative, but not exclusive for the Prairie Reconstruction Initiative. This is really, born out of we feel a bigger need to look at as many reconstructions as possible and to share and learn from these data, um, so that our actions and practices on the land, our use of resources are most effective and efficient. So as Ian said, right, there's going to be, hopefully, right, as more and more people know and learn about the database, there'll be other researchers to say, oh, I have questions for that, and I think that I can. Okay, so let me get into the chat here. Ian, can you see that? Would non-American organizations, Nature Conservancy of Canada, be able to access the database information, or would data sharing be limited to American orgs?
That's a great question. It has not come up yet, but the AGOL system, essentially, it feels like it probably would work, but I don't want to say it definitely will work because we can add lots of different folks from lots of different institutions, it seems like. And I'd imagine that, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, if they have an Esri enterprise account or something similar, I can't imagine that we wouldn't be able to add them unless there's some weird institutional barrier there that I don't know about. But yeah, I'm betting it would work.
Let's see, Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Right now, we have data mostly from a couple of big agencies, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Would you remind people that we encourage smaller orgs to get involved too?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the major barrier to folks getting involved is that Esri piece and being able to access that. So we do have some solutions to overcoming that. So even smaller organizations, I know many nonprofits and stuff still have access to Esri products. So if you have access to that, we can get you going. There's no problem there. Um, and one of the things that I would probably discuss with any group kind of coming in that way would be, if there's going to be a lot of folks kind of from an organization getting involved, that we just kind of coordinate getting them all into one working space, and instead of kind of me working with many people individually, we can kind of all funnel them into the working space that they would need to be in. But yes, absolutely. And we have the ability through Fish and Wildlife Service to create collaborator accounts, but I can't do this at like a large scale. So I think there could be a place for a conversation with a group organization that maybe it doesn't have access to Esri's world and who would like it, to potentially get access, but I couldn't give like 10 or 15 people this kind of access. So it would probably need to be the right fit for that type of solution, I guess. So there are some solutions, but yeah, it wouldn't work if it required like dozens and dozens of these.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Julia, thanks, Ian. It's great to hear about the progress on the PRI database. I look forward to hearing more as it develops, especially the
Absolutely.
management piece, right? Because that is the important thing. It's not only right, it's this collective effort of learning more about the reconstruction, but also, as you saw in the example, um, it could be a way of keeping track of your reconstructions as well, and in um, individuals asking questions of those individual units to help with management or other decision making.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to say real quickly with I think 5 minutes or so left, if there's no more questions, I was able to get the survey 123 thing up. So I could show that really quick
Yeah,
if
go
there
for
were
it.
if there were interest in that. But I didn't want to cut off questions if people are really if there's any more. But um, yeah, so this is what the survey 123 desktop app looks like. And you can see a couple of surveys in here that I have. So there's one for seed mixes. So if I were to collect information about the seed mix, you would want to give it a nice unique name. There's some guidance up here about how to utilize the form in the best way possible. And you can start kind of entering in some of this like seed origin and processing information. Kind of only if everything's kind of coming from the same location, you can just enter it once. If it's coming from Illinois, maybe it's Clay County, you can enter these data in. And then down here is where the species information really comes in. So you can really start to, we have like common names on a lot of things. So let's go for one of my favorites. And we can start to build species lists in this way, 20 we have 20 seeds of pure live seed per square foot. Maybe we don't have any seed amount area, maybe it's just total. This is to accommodate folks who have maybe just a seeding prescription in front of them. And we can enter different kinds of, viability testing or different kinds of seed testing if that's a piece. And we can use, we have this repeat function. So as we start entering all this information, each species has all this info associated with it. And you can see your list kind of being built down here as you go. And so the other forms kind of follow a similar kind of tact. So with the planting event here, you can collect data, and you have ways of entering in your own polygon. So this is a great way to kind of just see what's here in the Fish and Wildlife Service. If I were going to potentially enter a polygon here, this tool is very easy to use. I can draw it right in if that's what we have to do, but we can also do uploads directly into the form. So I can create my reconstruction right there and say, yeah, that's perfect, beautiful. And there it is. And then I could start filling in all this information about how it was seeded. And then I can start entering the seed mixes that are associated with it. So maybe it's this seed mix, and then maybe there's a second one, and maybe it was only 30% of this one that was used out of the whole lot that was entered. So this is where we can kind of assign these seed mixes, these reconstructions, and it's all done through these forms, which should be pretty, hopefully, user friendly. But it's still Survey 123, so there's these little nuances, and I've always been really happy to help folks if there's any confusion or any issues using the forms. So that's kind of what those Survey 123 forms for the different institutions would kind of look like. And they're the same for every institution. It's just making sure that you have your own workspace where you don't have to look at all the stuff from every other institution and can kind of really focus on the things that you're working on. And they all get pulled into the same database at the end.
Great. Thank you so much for showing us that, Ian. Are there any other questions or comments from our group that's left? If not, once again, I thank
Hey,
Ian.
Jamie.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted, I'm sick, so my voice sounds terrible. But I just wanted to mention that we are planning some field days this summer
Right.
to go over the monitoring protocol and then using the Survey 123 app to enter data into the database. So keep a lookout for those. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for the reminder, Amanda. Yeah, and we'll get those notices sent out by email as well and put up on the website and let people know. So tell all your prairie planting friends what's going on. And thanks again to Ian. Thanks to everybody who was online with us today. There'll be one more um, uh, webinar next week, March the 5th, back here at this time. And I'll hope to see all or some of you again. Thanks. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.